everyone, Sarah here. I am at Lansdowne Resort today. They're all decorated for the holidays, and I am getting ready for Allison and Dane's rehearsal. Their wedding is at Stone Tower tomorrow, but we are rehearsing here at Lansdowne tonight. It's my second week in a row, I guess it's been a week since I've been here, but been spending some time here at Lansdowne the last few weeks, which I love. It's a beautiful resort, and they have beautiful rooms, and you can't see the sunset out here behind me, I guess. Can I fix that? Sunset over the woods back there, it's beautiful. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about some tips on guest lists. So the guest list is such an important part of wedding planning, obviously. The guest list is going to have an effect on your entire event. It's not just a matter of who's going to be there that day, but it's also going to affect, the venue that you can choose, what your budget's going to look like. And we're not just talking catering, we're talking the florals, how many arrangements you're going to have. We're talking rentals. How many chairs will you have? How many tables will you have? How many linens will you have? It's an exponential growth depending on how big your guest list is. So you need to take that into consideration. And I encourage my couples to do that first thing. So I was talking with one of my couples this morning, and they hadn't finished up their guest list. And I just really encouraged them to make that the goal for the weekend. Talk about your guest list, see where those numbers are, and then we can keep going. Then we can talk about venue. Then we can talk about where all this money is going to go, and really zero in on that budget. If you have a set budget, obviously, if you have a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 budget, and you're planning on having 15 guests, 25 guests, 100 guests, 600 guests, that number, those numbers are relative. So a 600-person wedding for $10,000 is not going to get you very far, but $100,000 for 600 people, still a lot, but it gets you there. So let's see. We talked about how the budget is affected by your guest count. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is how hard this can be, right? You're like, I have so many friends. I have 1,400 friends on Facebook. But obviously we know Facebook friends doesn't necessarily mean friends that are going to be at your wedding. It's definitely the hardest part for a lot of my couples, and you get a lot of input from people. Your families, they want to have input. They want to invite their friends. Who's mom going to invite? Who's dad going to invite? Your brother wants to invite his friend, whatever it might be. So it's definitely a difficult topic at the beginning of the wedding, and probably one of the hardest decisions that you will be making. My suggestion is that you, as a couple, are the first people to make a list. So brides, grooms, make your lists. And maybe you make those separately and then come together and you say, well, here are the people that we both have on this list. Here are the people that I want to invite. And then take those lists to your families. Then take the list to your mom and your dad and say, hey, here's our list. This is who we're looking at having at the wedding. Who are you thinking that you wanna have? So yes. So then there's different categories. We have our family category. So mom and dad and brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents, and then obviously it extends from there. Extended family, cousins, extended aunts and uncles, stepbrothers and stepsisters, and all of those sorts of things. So that's the first category, is family. The second category is close friends. So the people who are in your life on a regular basis, you see them, you go out together, you're doing shots on Friday night, whatever it might be. And then we have our professional friends. So your coworkers, your boss, maybe your employees. And so that's the third category. And then the fourth category are significant relationships. So I have a lot of these in my life. People that I don't stay necessarily in regular touch with. Maybe I don't get to see them every year, but they're significant. They're my best friends. We just don't live close to each other right now. We went to college together. We rode the bus in 3rd grade together. You know, all of those sorts of things. And those people are still significant. You still want them at your wedding, and they mean something to you, and it's important to you that they are there. So, the next thing to think about is A, B, and even C lists. It's okay to have an A, B, and a C list. You want to have those categories of people and know, like, I have to invite my family and I want to invite my family. I have to invite my close friends and I want to, and so forth. You have your must-haves, and then you have those additional friends, and then you have that sort of like nice to have if my budget allows. So those must-haves are your A list. The additional friends that you want to invite, that's your B list. And the nice to have if my budget allows, that's your C list. And one of the pieces of advice that I always give, you know, they used to say that you could expect a certain amount of fall off from your guest list. So if you invite 100 people, 20% of them aren't going to show up. But that's just not the case anymore. Travel is so easy these days with online websites. Travel is much less expensive than it used to be. So that's not necessarily the case anymore. And so my advice is, if they are invited, you should expect them to come. So you want to have a space for that person if you are sending them an invitation to the wedding. Of course, as you get RSVPs back and you understand that certain people aren't coming, that's when you get to tap into that B list and that C list, and you can work those people into the guest list if your A list, that fall off number is happening, and your budget allows for it. Sometimes you make these extra lists and then you decide you want to spend money somewhere else, and you never get to the B list and the C list because people aren't showing up from your A list, and you want to have a photo booth, or you want to add a videographer, or whatever it might be. So obviously there's always some flexibility with that, and maybe you're going to change your mind later. I also want to talk about how to cut your guest list. So it's easy to put a list together of your 1,400 Facebook friends and all your Twitter followers. Just kidding. But ways to cut your guest list, here's a few ideas. Consider an adults-only reception. No kids. So sometimes your sister has 3 kids and they're going to be the flower girl and the ring bearer. Fine. You know, I've had weddings where a few kids come, but, you know, cousins' kids aren't invited, best friends' kids aren't invited. But cutting kids from the guest list will automatically give you a little more space to invite some of those adults who are more important to you. One of the ways that you can do this is to print names on the response cards. People always ask, you know, well, how do I ensure that people don't just like bring their kids? Well, you do an RSVP. You always want to have an RSVP card, and that obviously looks different depending on the type of meal that you're serving. But one of the ways that you can do that is just to print the names on the response cards. The next way that you can cut your guest list, or to think about cutting your guest list, is if you are inviting someone only because you feel guilty. Guilt is awful. I'm Catholic. I have lots of guilt. But if you are only inviting somebody because you think that you're going to feel guilty about not inviting them, that's not a person that you want to have there. If you're not excited about having them there, that's not a person you need at your wedding, and you're gonna figure that out, I promise. Another way to cut your guest list is to think about, another rule that you can think about is, if your partner has never heard of this person before, maybe they don't need to come to the wedding. you know, there's probably a reason they haven't heard of them. So maybe that's just not somebody that needs to come. And the last one that I'm going to talk about is if you haven't spoken. And I have people that say, if you haven't spoken in 2 years, if you haven't spoken in 3 years, and they're not related to you, because maybe you have aunts or uncles that you don't speak to that often, but you know, they're family and they're still going to come. They're going to be on mom and dad's guest list. But if you haven't spoken to them in 2 or 3 years, probably don't need to be at the wedding. Yeah, so those are some ideas on your guest list. And then once you are starting to get this guest list together and you're looking to organize, I always suggest an Excel sheet. I'm kind of an Excel junkie. But the reason for that is that you can use this list throughout the entire planning process. So if you start gathering names, and part of doing the guest list is not just to get the list of names, but it's to start collecting addresses, because you're going to need those for your invitations. So we're going to collect names, we're going to get addresses, we're going to write them in this Excel sheet the way that we want them to be addressed on our invitations to save us some work later on. We're going to have phone numbers, maybe phone numbers, but we're definitely going to have email addresses. And then you can use this Excel sheet and you can add meal choices later. You can add the table number they're going to be at later, and you can add any notes such as dietary restrictions and things like that. So starting out and being organized from the beginning with this Excel sheet, having those names typed out properly, having the spelling correct, and then getting the addresses. Addresses can take forever to collect, you guys. So you want to start doing that at the beginning. You don't want to be ready to send your invitations out and realize that you don't have somebody's address, and that invitation's not going to be able to go out because you didn't take that into consideration. So you want to have the name, you want to have the address, you want to have the email address, and then later on, it's going to be a great document. Add the meal choices, the table numbers, and any notes or dietary restrictions. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is circling back to the first thing that we talked about, which is budget and how this guest list really affects your budget. So sometimes when you're thinking about the cost per guest, you're looking at a catering cost. So maybe the catering costs, you know, $75, $100, up to $250, $300 per person, depending on where you live and where you're having your wedding. But that's not the total cost per person, because once you have those rentals and florals and the venue cost and all of these other things incorporated, then that changes and it becomes much bigger. Sorry, I'm just making sure I left my purse up there, just checking it out. That number can become anywhere from, you know, $250 to upwards of $500+ per person. So it really can affect your overall budget, this size of your guest list. So to recap, guest lists are so important, and it's definitely one of the first things you should be thinking about after you get engaged. I would encourage you to think about it before you book a venue, before you book a caterer, before you do all of these things, because you're really going to want to know, what is that number that I'm basing all of these decisions off of? And I don't want to come up and be surprised at the end when I was expecting 100 people, but I didn't put my guest list together, so I actually have 150 people. And the difference between 100 and 150 could be your venue, could be, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars. So that's our tip. I'm a day late, but I hope you got something out of it anyways. If you have any questions about guest lists or tips on how to handle the guest list process, or how to tell mom that her yoga instructor is not invited, let me know. Happy to chat with you about it, and look forward to seeing you guys again. I'm gonna go get Allison and Dane rehearsed so they can get married tomorrow, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. Bye.